Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're new here, you've just stumbled onto a collection of some of the most unsettling real-life accounts from the people who work in the most isolated, dangerous places on Earth. Today, we're diving deep into the world of offshore oil rigs and cargo ships. These massive structures sit miles from any coastline, surrounded by nothing but dark water and the kind of silence that makes you question every shadow, every sound. The people who work these jobs spend weeks, sometimes months, cut off from civilization, where help is hours or even days away. What you're about to hear are 6 horror stories from deep sea and offshore workers. Some of these accounts were shared anonymously on maritime forums. Others were pulled from Coast Guard reports that were later declassified. And a few came from workers who finally felt safe enough to talk after leaving the industry for good. These aren't your typical ghost stories. These are experiences that happen to real people, in real places, where the ocean doesn't care about your fear, and sometimes neither does what's lurking in it. So get comfortable, turn up the volume, and whatever you do, don't think too hard about what's swimming beneath you the next time you're out on the water. And if you enjoy what you hear today, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the edge of human experience. Let's begin. Story 1. The knocking. Here's something most people don't know about offshore oil rigs. The legs that anchor them to the ocean floor can extend over 500 feet below the surface. That's 50 stories of steel column disappearing into black water, and those columns are hollow, which means sound travels through them. And sometimes something knocks back. This story came to me through an old forum post on an offshore workers community board. It was posted back in 2011 by a user named rigtech_Marco, and while the original post has since been deleted, several users had quoted it in their replies, preserving the account. Marco worked as a maintenance technician on a platform in the North Sea, and he only posted this story once before his account went silent. Several users tried to follow up with him, but he never responded again. Here's what happened. Marco had been working on platform Bravo 9 for about 6 months when the knocking started. The rig was one of the older models, built in the early 80s, and it sat about 180 miles off the coast of Scotland. The crew lived in tight quarters, worked brutal 12-hour shifts, and after a while you got used to the constant groaning of metal, the wind screaming through the derrick and the waves slamming against the legs. But this sound was different. It started on a Tuesday night around 2 a.m. Marco was in his bunk when he heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Metal on metal. Deep and resonant, like someone was striking the inside of the platform leg with a wrench. He sat up, listening. The noise came again. 3 knocks, then silence.
Marco figured it was one of the guys messing around. Happens sometimes when people get stir crazy.
He rolled over and tried to sleep, but the knocking came back 10 minutes later. Same rhythm. X. Pause. 3 knocks. The next morning, he mentioned it to a few of the crew during breakfast. Nobody admitted to anything, but one of the older guys, a driller named Peterson, went pale when Marco described the sound. "You heard it from below?" Peterson asked. "Yeah, sounded like it was coming up through the structure." "Why?" Peterson didn't answer right away. He just stared at his coffee, then said, "Don't go looking for it." That should have been enough of a warning. But Marco was the curious type, and he had access to the lower levels as part of his maintenance duties. Most offshore rigs have sections below the main deck that the average worker never sees. Inspection corridors, pump rooms, ballast control stations, dark, cramped spaces that smell like rust and brine. 2 nights later, the knocking woke him up again. This time it was louder, more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from directly beneath his quarters. Marco grabbed a flashlight and headed down. The lower corridors were a maze of narrow catwalks and hatches. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. The walls were slick with condensation, and the air tasted like oil and salt. Marco made his way to the access corridor that led to the platform's northwest leg. The knocking was louder here, echoing up through the hollow column. He stopped at the sealed hatch that opened into the leg itself. It was a maintenance access point, used for internal inspections of the structural column. The hatch was locked, but Marco had the key. His hand was on the lock when the knocking stopped. Silence. Just the hum of the generators somewhere above. Then, from inside the leg, a voice. It was faint, muffled by the metal, but it was unmistakably human. A man's voice calling out, "Help me please, I'm stuck." Marco's blood went cold. There shouldn't be anyone inside the leg. It was a sealed column, no interior access except for these maintenance hatches, and no one had been scheduled for inspection in weeks. "Who's in there?" Marco shouted. The voice called back, clearer now. "I don't know how I got in here. Please, I can't get out. It's so cold." Marco's mind raced. If someone had actually gotten trapped inside the leg, they'd be in serious danger. Hypothermia, drowning if seawater had breached the column, or worse. He unlocked the hatch and pulled it open. The smell hit him first. Seawater and something else. Something rotten, organic. He aimed his flashlight inside. The interior of the leg was a vertical shaft, with a ladder running down into darkness. Ocean water sloshed about 20 feet below, rising and falling with the waves. "Where are you?" Marco called down. The voice came from below, echoing up the shaft. "Down here. Can see your light." Marco hesitated. Something felt wrong. The voice was too calm, too clear. If someone was really trapped down there in freezing water, they'd be panicking, screaming. He climbed onto the ladder and started descending. The metal rungs were slick, and the air grew colder with every step. The water below was black, reflecting his flashlight like a mirror. He could hear it lapping against the walls of the shaft, a wet, rhythmic sound. "Keep talking so I can find you," Marco said. "I'm right here," the voice replied. It was close now, too close. Sounded like it was coming from just below the water's surface. Marco stopped climbing. His flashlight beam swept across the water. There was nothing there. No one floating. No one clinging to the ladder below him. "Where are you?" he called again. The water rippled, and then something broke the surface. It wasn't a person. It was pale, slick, and wrong. The shape of it was almost human, but the proportions were off. Too long, too thin. Its face tilted up toward him, and in the beam of his flashlight, Marco saw its eyes. Black, empty pits. Its mouth opened, and the voice came out again. The same voice that had been calling for help. "Come down," it said. "The water's fine." Marco scrambled back up the ladder so fast he nearly lost his footing. He didn't look back. Didn't stop climbing until he was out of the hatch, and he slammed it shut behind him, locking it with shaking hands. He reported it to the platform manager the next morning, told him there was something in the leg, something that shouldn't be there. The manager looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "You were probably hearing echoes from the water," the manager said. "Sound does weird things in those columns. Gets into your head." But Marco knew what he'd seen, and he wasn't the only one. Over the next week, 3 other workers reported hearing the knocking. One of them, a roughneck named Collins, went down to investigate just like Marco had. He came back up white as a sheet and refused to talk about it. 2 days later, Collins requested an emergency transfer off the rig, citing a family emergency. He left on the next supply boat and never came back. The knocking continued. Every few nights, always between 2 and 4 a.m., the crew started sleeping in shifts, trying to ignore it. But ignoring it didn't make it stop. Then one night it changed. Marco was lying awake when he heard it. Not 3 knocks this time. Dozens. Hundreds. Coming from all 4 legs of the platform at once. A cacophony of metal, striking metal, echoing up through the structure like a drum beat. It went on for 10 minutes straight, then stopped all at once. The next morning, a diver was sent down to inspect the legs for damage. It was routine after unusual vibrations. The diver's name was Hansen, a veteran with over 15 years of deep-sea experience. He went down the northwest leg first, the same one Marco had opened. Hansen's dive lasted less than 10 minutes. When he surfaced, he was hyperventilating, nearly ripping his regulator out of his mouth. The crew pulled him onto the dive platform, and he sat there, shaking, unable to speak. When he finally calmed down, he told them what he'd seen. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed into the algae and barnacles covering the exterior of the leg, starting about 40 feet below the surface and continuing down into the dark. Small handprints like a child's. And at the 60-foot mark where the light from the surface faded, he saw something else. A figure clinging to the leg, pale and motionless, watching him. Hansen refused to dive again. Company sent another diver down 2 days later, but by then the handprints were gone. Washed away, they said. Natural ocean currents. But the knocking didn't stop. Marco finished his rotation and left platform Bravo 9 3 weeks later. He never went back to offshore work. In his forum post, he ended with this: "I don't know what's down there. I don't know if it's something that lives in the ocean or something that got trapped in that leg a long time ago and never left. But I know it wanted me to come down. And I know that if I had climbed just a little bit lower, I wouldn't be writing this." The post was deleted within 24 hours. Several users claimed that RigTech_Marco's account was wiped entirely, as if it had never existed. A few tried to verify the story with workers from other North Sea platforms, but no one would talk about platform Bravo 9 on record. The rig itself is still operational as far as I can tell, still pulling oil out of the seabed, still housing a rotating crew of workers who spend weeks at a time surrounded by dark water. And somewhere below in the hollow legs of that platform, something is still knocking. If you've worked offshore and heard something similar, or if you know someone who has, I'd love to hear about it. And if this story got under your skin the way it did mine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got 5 more stories coming your way, and trust me, they only get worse from here. Story 2, the cargo. Here's a fact that'll keep you up at night. There are over 50,000 cargo ships operating across the world's oceans at any given moment, and a significant number of them are carrying unmarked containers. Officially, these containers hold standard freight machinery, textiles, electronics. But maritime law has a funny little loophole. If a container is classified as hazardous materials or sealed diplomatic cargo, the crew isn't allowed to open it, inspect it, or even ask questions about what's inside. Sometimes, though, you don't need to open a container to know something's wrong with it. This story comes from a cargo ship called the MV Empress, a mid-sized container vessel that ran routes between Southeast Asia and the west coast of the United States. I found this account on a now-defunct maritime blog, posted anonymously by someone who claimed to be a junior engineer aboard the Empress during a particularly strange voyage in 2014. The post was corroborated by another user who said they worked in port logistics and remembered the Empress docking early, well ahead of schedule, with several crew members requesting immediate transfers. The original poster never revealed their real name, but their account was detailed, specific, and deeply unsettling. Here's what they said happened. The MV Empress departed from Jakarta with a full load of containers, stacked 6 high on the deck and more packed into the hold below. It was a routine 3-week crossing, nothing unusual. The crew was experienced, the weather was decent, and the cargo manifest listed standard freight, electronics, auto parts, textiles, and 3 containers marked as sealed biological samples in refrigerated units. Those 3 containers were stored in the forward hold, isolated from the rest of the cargo. They were marked with a red biohazard symbol and a custom seal that couldn't be broken without voiding the shipment. The manifest listed them as property of a private research firm, and the captain made it clear during the departure briefing. No one was to approach those containers unless absolutely necessary. The junior engineer, who we'll call Sam, didn't think much of it at first. Ships carry weird cargo all the time. Medical samples, lab specimens, sometimes even human remains being transported for burial. You load it, you transport it, You don't ask questions. But 3 days into the voyage, things started to go wrong. It began with the refrigeration unit on container to be the middle one of the 3 sealed containers.
Oh.
The temperature started fluctuating.
Oh.
It was supposed to be held at a constant -10 degrees Celsius, but the gauge was showing it creeping up to -5, then dropping back down, then spiking again. Sam was sent down to the hold to check the unit. The forward hold was a massive, dimly lit space, stacked floor to ceiling with containers. The air was cold, recycled through the ship's ventilation, and it smelled like oil and rust. Sam made his way to the refrigerated units and checked the compressor on 2B. Everything looked fine mechanically. But the temperature was still fluctuating. That's when he heard the sound. A rhythmic thumping coming from inside the container. Slow and deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. Sam froze. He stood there, listening. The thumping continued, steady and methodical, like someone was hitting the inside of the container with the flat of their hand. He backed away and radioed up to the bridge. "Hey, I'm getting some weird noises from 2B. You sure this thing's just biological samples?" The first mate's voice crackled back, expansion and contraction from the temperature change. Metal does that. Don't worry about it. Sam wanted to believe that. But the thumping didn't sound like metal expanding. It sounded deliberate. It sounded intentional. He finished his check and got out of the hold as fast as he could. That night, the ship's cook reported something strange. He'd gone into the cold storage to get ingredients for dinner, and he swore he heard whispering. He couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like it was coming from the vent's voices, multiple voices, all talking over each other in a low murmur. The crew laughed it off. Long voyages mess with your head. The isolation, the engine noise, the lack of sleep, it all adds up. People hear things that aren't there. But then the smell started. It came up through the ventilation system. A thick, rotten stench, like decaying meat mixed with something chemical. It was strongest near the forward hold, but it spread through the entire ship within a day. The crew tried to locate the source, checking the bilge, the waste systems. Even the galley, nothing. The captain ordered Sam back down to the hold to inspect the refrigerated containers. If one of those units failed and the samples spoiled, that explained the smell, the captain said. Sam didn't want to go back down there, but orders were orders. He descended into the hold with a flashlight and a respirator. The smell was overpowering, even through the mask. It clung to the air like a fog. He approached the 3 containers and checked the temperature gauges. All 3 were reading normal now. -10 degrees Celsius, exactly as they should be. But the smell was coming from them. He was sure of it. Sam stepped closer to container to B, the one that had been making noise. Pressed his ear against the cold metal, listening. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigeration unit. Then from inside, a voice. Faint, muffled, but unmistakably human. Sam jerked back so hard he nearly tripped over his own feet. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the container. His mind was racing. There was no way, no possible way. These containers had been sealed by customs. They'd been loaded in Jakarta under supervision. No one could be inside. "Let us out," the voice came again, clearer this time. Then another voice joined it. And another, a chorus of them, all saying the same thing, overlapping, growing louder. "Let us out. Let us out." Sam ran. He didn't stop running until he was back on deck, gasping for air, his heart pounding in his chest. He told the captain everything. The captain didn't believe him at first, but when Sam refused to go back down alone, the first mate and 2 other crew members went with him to verify. They stood in the hold, silent, listening. For 10 minutes, there was nothing. Just the hum of machinery and the creak of the ship's hull. The first mate was about to call it a false alarm when the voices started again. All 4 of them heard it. A dozen voices, maybe more, coming from inside the containers. Some were pleading, some were screaming. And underneath it all, a wet, rhythmic sound, like something moving inside the container, shifting and writhing. The first mate radioed the captain. "Need to open these containers." "You can't," the captain said. "They're sealed cargo. You break that seal, the company doesn't get paid, and we're liable for the entire shipment." "There are people in there," the first mate insisted. "It's a recording," the captain shot back. "Some kind of psychological deterrent to keep people from tampering with the cargo. I've heard of this before. Just leave it alone." But it wasn't a recording. Sam was sure of it. That night, the voices stopped. The smell faded. The ship settled back into an uneasy calm. But Sam couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what he'd heard. The desperation in those voices. The way they overlapped, like they were fighting to be heard. 2 days later, the ship's second engineer, a man named Torres, disappeared. He'd been on the night shift doing routine checks on the engine. When his replacement came to relieve him at 6 a.m., Torres was gone. His tools were still in the engine room. His radio was on the bench, but there was no sign of him. They searched the entire ship, every compartment, every storage room, every crawl space. Nothing. Then someone checked the forward hold. Container to B was open. Not just unlocked, tripped open. The door bent outward, like something had forced its way out from the inside. The interior was empty. No biological samples. No equipment. Just frost-covered walls and a dark, viscous substance pooled on the floor. And written on the inside of the door, in that same substance, were 2 words. "Thank you." They found Torres 3 hours later. He was in the aft storage hold, sitting on the floor with his back against a bulkhead. He was alive, but unresponsive. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and he wouldn't speak, wouldn't move. The captain ordered an emergency diversion to the nearest port. The Empress docked in Hawaii 2 days later, and Torres was taken off the ship by medics. The sealed containers were offloaded under armed guard, and the crew was debriefed by port authorities. Sam never found out what was really in those containers. The company classified the entire incident, and the crew was made to sign NDAs. But Sam left the shipping industry after that voyage and never looked back. In his post, he ended with this: "I don't know what we were carrying. I don't know if it was alive, or if it had been dead and somehow came back, or if it was something else entirely. But I know those voices were real. And I know Torres saw something in that container, something that broke him. He's still in a psychiatric facility, as far as I know. Still won't talk." The post was deleted within a week. Several users tried to find records of the MV Empress. But the ship's registration was transferred to a different company shortly after the incident, and its name was changed. As far as I can tell, it's still out there, hauling cargo across the Pacific under a new identity. And somewhere, in a warehouse or a research facility, or maybe at the bottom of the ocean, those 3 containers are sitting, waiting for the next shipment. If you've ever worked in maritime shipping and come across something you weren't supposed to see, I'd love to hear your story. And if this one gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're just getting started. There are 4 more stories ahead, and trust me, the ocean has a lot more secrets than you think. Story 3. The Drill Team. Here's something you probably don't think about when you fill up your gas tank. Deepwater drilling operations can go down over 10,000 feet below the ocean's surface. It's nearly 2 miles of water, where the pressure is so intense it would crush a human body in seconds, and where the temperature hovers just above freezing. The drill bit itself punches through rock and sediment, sometimes breaking into pockets of gas and oil that have been sealed away for millions of years. And sometimes it breaks into something else. This story came from a whistleblower document that was briefly leaked on a file-sharing site in 2017 before being scrubbed. It detailed an incident aboard a deep-water drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico, operated by a company I won't name for legal reasons. The document included testimony from several crew members, drilling logs, and a series of audio recordings that were allegedly pulled from the rig's black box system. The incident took place in 2009, and it involved a crew of 14 people working a rotational shift on an exploratory drilling platform. Here's what the document said happened. The rig, which we'll call Platform Delta, was drilling an exploratory well about 150 miles off the coast of Louisiana. They were targeting a deep formation, pushing the drill bit down through over 8,000 feet of water and another 12,000 feet of rock. It was a higher-risk operation, but the surveys indicated a significant oil deposit, so the company pushed forward. The drill team was led by a man named Calhoun, a veteran driller with over 20 years of experience. His crew included roughnecks, engineers, and a geologist named Dr. Reinhardt, who was monitoring the samples as they came up from the drill site. Everything was going smoothly until they hit 19,400 feet. The drill bit broke through into a cavity, not a pocket of oil or gas void. A hollow space in the rock, roughly 30 feet in diameter, completely empty. The pressure readings dropped to almost nothing, and the drill string went slack like it had punched through into open air. Calhoun ordered the team to pull up a core sample. The drill brought up a cylinder of rock and sediment, and when Dr. Reinhardt examined it, she found something unusual. The rock was fractured, almost shattered, and embedded in it were fragments of something organic. Fossilized actual tissue, preserved in some kind of resinous substance. Dr. Reinhardt sent the sample to the lab for analysis. But before the results came back, the rig's sensors started going haywire. The drill hole was emitting a low-frequency vibration, something the sensors had never picked up before. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, pulsing up through the drill string and resonating through the entire platform. The crew could feel it in their bones, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that made their teeth ache. Then the temperature in the drill hole started to rise. At those depths, the ambient temperature should have been stable, maybe 40 or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But the sensors were showing it climbing. 60 degrees. 70, 90. Within an hour, it had spiked to over 120 degrees. And the drill string was heating up so fast they had to shut down the operation and pull it out before it warped. Calhoun ordered a halt on drilling until they could figure out what was going on. Dr. Reinhardt was analyzing the sample when the first crew member reported seeing something strange. One of the roughnecks, a guy named Eddie, was on the deck doing a routine check when he saw movement in the water. He called Calhoun over, and the two of them stood at the railing looking down. The ocean around the rig was dark, lit only by the platform's floodlights. But beneath the surface, maybe 30 or 40 feet down, something was moving. Not a fish, not a whale. Something massive, circling the rig in slow, deliberate loops. Eddie described it as a shadow with no source. It didn't reflect light, didn't break the surface, but it was there. He could see the water displacement, the way the current shifted as it moved. Calhoun radioed the bridge. "We've got something in the water. Large marine life, maybe a whale. Keep an eye on it." But it wasn't a whale. Over the next 2 hours, more crew members reported seeing it. Always circling, always just below the surface. Too deep to make out clearly, but too large to ignore. One of the engineers swore it surfaced for just a second, and he saw what looked like an eye, massive, pale, and unblinking. Then the sound started. It came through the rig's hull, a deep, resonant call that vibrated through the metal. It sounded almost like a whale song, but wrong, too rhythmic, too structured, like it was trying to communicate. Dr. Reinhardt's lab results came back around midnight. The organic material in the core sample wasn't from any known species. It was genetically anomalous, with a cellular structure that didn't match anything in the database. The preservation method was also unknown. Whatever had sealed it in the rock wasn't natural. Calhoun made the call to abandon the drill site and seal the hole. The company protested, but he overruled them. Something was down there, and he wasn't about to find out what. The crew began the process of sealing the well, pumping concrete down into the drill hole to cap it permanently. It took 6 hours, and the entire time that thing kept circling. The calls kept coming, louder now, more insistent. When the final plug was set, the calls stopped. The shadow in the water disappeared. The temperature readings dropped back to normal. The rig went silent. For about 10 minutes, everything seemed fine. The crew was exhausted but relieved. Calhoun radioed the company to confirm the well was sealed, and they began preparing to move the rig to a new site. Then the drill floor exploded. Not literally. There was no fire, no blast. But the sealed drill hole ruptured from below and something came up. Fast. The crew on the deck said it looked like black water at first, a geyser of dark fluid shooting up from the hole. But it wasn't water. It was thick, viscous, and it moved on its own. It spread across the deck like it was alive, pooling around equipment, seeping into cracks, and then it started reaching. Tendrils. That's what the survivors called them. Black, glistening tendrils that extended from the mass, probing, searching. One of them wrapped around a roughneck's leg, and he screamed as it pulled him toward the hole. 3 crew members grabbed him and yanked him back, and the tendril released, slithering back into the mass. Calhoun ordered everyone off the drill floor. They sealed the hatches and waited, listening as the thing moved above them, scraping against the metal, testing the doors. It took 4 hours before it receded. By the time the crew ventured back onto the deck, the mass was gone. The drill hole was empty, sealed again, but the deck was covered in a slick, black residue that smelled like sulfur and decay. The company sent a cleanup team, and the rig was decommissioned within a month. The well site was marked as geologically unstable and abandoned. The crew was paid off, made to sign NDAs, and scattered to other rigs across the Gulf. The whistleblower document included a final note from Dr. Reinhardt. Written 2 years after the incident, I don't know what we drilled into. I don't think it was a natural cavity. I think it was something that had been sealed intentionally a long time ago, and I think we let it out. The document was deleted within 48 hours of being uploaded, and every link to it has since been scrubbed. I managed to save a text copy before it disappeared, but the audio recordings mentioned in the document are lost. Platform Delta no longer exists. It was dismantled and sold for scrap. But the drill site is still down there, marked on maritime charts as a no-anchor zone. And somewhere at the bottom of the Gulf, there's a crack in the rock that we probably should have left alone. If you've worked in deepwater drilling and encountered something you couldn't explain, I'd love to hear your story. Not if this one left you uneasy. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got 3 more stories coming, and they're only getting darker from here. Story 4. The Night Shift. Here's a statistic that doesn't get talked about enough. On a typical cargo ship crossing the ocean, the crew is divided into watches 4-hour shifts, day and night, rotating so that the ship never goes unmanned. During the night shift, particularly between 2 and 6 a.m., most of the crew is asleep, and the ship is run by a skeleton staff. 1 person in the bridge, 1 in the engine room, maybe a lookout on deck. That's a lot of ship. A lot of dark corridors. A lot of empty rooms. And when you're alone on a vessel that size, in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight, your mind starts playing tricks on you, or at least that's what you tell yourself. This story was shared with me by a former merchant mariner named Kevin, who reached out after hearing some of my other maritime content. He didn't want his last name used, and he was hesitant to even tell the story. But he said it had been eating at him for years, and he needed to get it out. Kevin worked on container ships for over a decade, running routes between Europe and the Americas. He was a 3rd engineer, which meant he spent most of his time below deck in the engine room, maintaining the ship's massive diesel engines and generators. It was loud, hot, and isolating work, but he was used to it. The incident he described took place in 2012, aboard a cargo vessel called the MV Northern Star. It was a mid-sized ship, about 700 feet long, with a crew of 19. They were on a transatlantic crossing, hauling containers from Rotterdam to Baltimore, a trip that would take about 2 weeks. Kevin was assigned to the night shift 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., which meant he was alone in the engine room for most of his watch. The engine room on a ship that size is a massive, multi-level space filled with machinery, pistons, the size of cars, pipes running in every direction, catwalks suspended above the floor. The noise is constant and deafening, a roar of metal and combustion that drowns out everything else. But on the third night of the voyage, Kevin started hearing something that didn't belong. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible beneath the engine noise. A tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was knocking on metal. Kevin ignored it at first, figuring it was just thermal expansion or a loose bolt vibrating against a pipe. But it kept happening, and it always seemed to come from the same place, the aft section of the engine room, near the auxiliary generator. He walked over to investigate. The tapping stopped. Kevin checked the generator, looked for loose fittings, anything that might explain the sound. Everything was secure. He shrugged it off and went back to his station. 10 minutes later, the tapping started again. This time, it was closer. It sounded like it was coming from the catwalk above him. Kevin looked up. The catwalk was empty, just shadows and the dim glow of the emergency lighting. He radioed the bridge. "Hey, this is engineering. Anyone else down here with me?" The officer on watch replied, "Negative. You're solo down there? Why? Just hearing some weird noises?" "Probably nothing. You're in an engine room, mate. It's all weird noises." Kevin laughed it off and went back to work. But the tapping didn't stop. It followed him. Wherever he went in the engine room, it was always just out of sight, just around the corner, just above or below him. By the end of his shift, Kevin was unnerved, but convinced it was just the environment messing with his head. Long hours, isolation, the constant noise, it all adds up. The next night it got worse. Kevin started his shift at midnight, descending into the engine room as usual. Everything seemed normal at first. He did his rounds, checked the gauges, logged the readings. But around 1 a.m., the tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent. And then he heard the footsteps. Not the clang of boots on a metal deck. These were soft, deliberate, like someone was walking barefoot. They echoed on the catwalk above him, slow and measured, moving from one end of the engine room to the other. Kevin froze. He looked up, shining his flashlight toward the catwalk. Nothing, just shadows. "Hello?" he called out. No response. But the footsteps kept going, reaching the far end of the catwalk, then stopping. Kevin radioed the bridge again. "Hey, I need someone to come down here. Think we've got a stowaway or something." The officer on watch sounded skeptical, but agreed to send someone down. 5 minutes later, the ship's bosun, a gruff older man named Harris, arrived. "What's the problem?" Harris asked. Kevin explained what he'd heard. Harris listened, then walked the length of the engine room, checking every corner, every catwalk, every storage locker. He found nothing. "You're hearing things, mate," Harris said. "It happens. Get some sleep after your shift." But Harris looked uneasy as he left, and Kevin noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder. That night, Kevin barely slept. When he came back for his shift the following night, he was dreading it. He descended into the engine room, and for the first hour, everything was quiet. No tapping, no footsteps. Then, at 2 a.m., the lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency lighting stayed on, casting the engine room in a dim red glow. But the main overhead lights were gone, and the engine room was suddenly a maze of deep shadows. Kevin radioed the bridge. "We just lost main lighting down here." "We see it," the officer replied. "Breaker must have tripped. I'll send someone to check the electrical panel." Kevin waited. The engine room felt different in the dark. The shadows seemed deeper, the machinery more menacing. He could hear the engines, the rhythmic churning of the pistons, but underneath it, there was something else. Breathing. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise, but it was there. Slow, deliberate breaths, like someone was standing just behind him. Kevin spun around. Nothing. The breathing continued. It was coming from above, from the catwalk. Kevin aimed his flashlight up, and that's when he saw it. A figure, standing on the catwalk, silhouetted against the red emergency lighting. It was humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at odd angles. It stood perfectly still, facing him. Kevin's blood ran cold. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He just stood there, staring up at the figure, his flashlight beam trembling in his hand. The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion. Then it stepped forward, off the catwalk, and dropped. It should have hit the deck with a crash, but it didn't. It landed silently, impossibly light, and when Kevin's flashlight found it again, it was gone. Kevin ran. He didn't stop running until he was out of the engine room, up the stairs, and into the main corridor. He radioed the bridge, gasping for breath, and told them he was done. He wasn't going back down there. The captain was furious, but Kevin refused. He stayed on deck for the rest of the voyage, helping with other duties, anything to avoid the engine room. When they docked in Baltimore, Kevin requested an immediate transfer off the Northern Star. He never worked on that ship again. Years later, Kevin did some digging. He found out that the MV Northern Star had a history. In 2003, a crew member had died in the engine room in an accident involving the auxiliary generator. The man had been working alone on the night shift when a steam pipe ruptured, scalding him to death. Body wasn't found until the next morning. Kevin doesn't know if what he saw was the ghost of that crew member or something else entirely. But he knows what he heard. He knows what he saw. And he knows he'll never set foot in an engine room at night again. If you've worked at sea and experienced something that still haunts you, I'd love to hear your story. And if this one sent a chill down your spine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got 2 more stories left, and the ocean isn't done with us yet. Story 5. The Rescue. Here's a maritime fact that most people never think about. International waters have no jurisdiction. If something happens more than 12 nautical miles from shore, there's no police, no Coast Guard with legal authority, no one to call for help except other ships in the area. Distress calls go out over open channels, and if you're lucky, someone hears you and decides to respond. If you're unlucky, the wrong person hears you. This story was documented in a series of incident reports filed with the International Maritime Organization in 2015. It involved a distress call picked up by multiple vessels in the South Atlantic, about 600 miles off the coast of Brazil. The call came from a yacht, a 40-foot sailing vessel called the Pelican. Registered out of Miami, on board were 2 people, a man named Derek Hollis and his wife, Anne. They were on a round-the-world sailing trip, and they were in trouble. The distress call was picked up by a cargo freighter called the MV Sea Venture, which was about 80 miles away at the time. The captain of the Sea Venture, a man named Petrov, diverted course to assist. The call itself was erratic. Derek Hollis was panicking, his voice breaking up over the radio. He said their yacht was taking on water, the bilge pump had failed, and they were sinking. He gave their coordinates and begged for help. Petrov radioed back, confirming that the Sea Venture was en route and would reach them in about 5 hours. He told Derek to stay calm, put on life jackets, and prepare to abandon ship if necessary. Derek acknowledged, and the line went quiet. The Sea Venture made good time, and by late afternoon, they arrived at the coordinates. The crew scanned the water, looking for the Pelican. What they found was worse than they expected. The yacht was still afloat, but barely. It was listing heavily to one side, the deck awash with water, sails torn and hanging limp. There was no sign of anyone on board. Petrov ordered a small rescue boat launched. 3 crew members, an officer named Griggs, an engineer named Sokolov, and a deckhand named Luis, motored over to the yacht. They tied up alongside and climbed aboard. The yacht was a mess. Cabin hatch was open, and water was pouring into the interior. Griggs descended into the cabin and found it flooded up to knee level. Supplies were floating everywhere. Clothes, food, navigation equipment, but no people. "Hello," Derek called out. "Derek Ann?" No response. They searched the entire yacht. The galley, the sleeping quarters, the head, air. There was no sign of Derek or Ann, but there were signs of a struggle. The navigation table was overturned, and there were scratches on the cabin walls, deep gouges in the wood like someone had clawed at them. And in the aft cabin, Griggs found something that made his stomach turn. Blood. Not a lot, but enough. Smeared on the wall, on the floor, leading up to the deck. Fresh enough that it was still wet, Griggs radioed back to the Sea Venture. "We've got a problem. The yacht's abandoned, but there's blood everywhere. Looks like something bad happened here." Petrov ordered them to check the water around the yacht, to see if Derek and Ann had gone overboard. But the ocean was empty. No bodies, no debris, no life raft. Griggs and his team were about to head back when Luis noticed something. The yacht's emergency GPS beacon was still active, transmitting its position. But there was a second signal coming from nearby, another beacon, about half a mile away. Griggs made the call to check it out. They motored toward the signal, scanning the water, and that's when they saw it. A life raft, a small orange, drifting with the current. And there was someone inside. They pulled up alongside, and Luis grabbed the raft, pulling it close. Inside was a woman, Ann Hollis. She was alive, barely. She was soaking wet, shivering, her eyes wide and glassy with shock. She didn't respond when they called her name. They hauled her into the rescue boat and radioed back to the Sea Venture. Petrov ordered them to bring her aboard immediately. Once Ann was on the freighter, the ship's medic examined her. She was hypothermic, dehydrated, and covered in bruises, but otherwise unharmed. The medic wrapped her in blankets and gave her fluids, and after about an hour, she started to come around. Petrov sat with her, trying to get answers. "Ann, what happened? Where's Derek?" and stared at him for a long time, her eyes unfocused. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He's still on the boat, the yacht," Petrov asked. "We searched it. There's no one there." "Not the yacht," Ann said. "The other boat?" Petrov frowned. "What other boat?" Ann's hands were shaking. "We sent the distress call because we were sinking. But before you got there, another boat showed up. A trawler. Old, rusted, no markings. It pulled up alongside us, and a man called out, said he'd help." "Who was he?" Petrov asked. "I don't know, we couldn't see him clearly. It was getting dark." But Derek was so relieved. He thought we were saved. He climbed onto the trawler to talk to them, to ask if they could tow us or give us supplies. Ann's voice cracked. But when he got on their boat, they wouldn't let him leave. Petrov felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" They grabbed him, pulled him inside. I heard him screaming, begging them to let him go. I tried to get to him, but they pushed me back. One of the men on the trawler, he looked at me and smiled, and he said, "You can go, but he stays." Ann was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. I jumped into the life raft. I didn't know what else to do. I left him. And they took the trawler and disappeared. Petrov radioed his crew immediately. "Did anyone see another vessel in the area?" "A trawler? Old? No markings?" The lookout on the bridge responded, "Negative, Captain. We've had visual on the area for hours. No other ships." Petrov pressed in for more details. What did the trawler look like? What direction did it go? How many people were on board? But Ann couldn't give coherent answers. She was slipping back into shock, mumbling about the men on the trawler, the way they moved, the way they looked at her. The Sea Venture searched the area for the next 12 hours. They found the abandoned yacht and towed it for a short distance before it finally sank. But there was no sign of the trawler. No debris, No radar contacts, nothing. Derek Hollis was never found. Anne was taken to a hospital when the Sea Venture docked in Rio de Janeiro. She told her story to the authorities, but without any evidence, there was nothing they could do. No trawler matching her description was ever located. No bodies were recovered. The incident was classified as a missing person case, and eventually it was closed. But here's the thing that kept Petrov up at night. He'd been monitoring the radio channels during the entire rescue. If another vessel had been in the area, they would have heard the distress call. They would have shown up on radar. They would have left some trace. But there was nothing. Just Anne's story, and the blood on the yacht, and Derek's voice on that last distress call begging for help. Years later, Petrov heard rumors from other captains in the South Atlantic. Stories about ghost ships, trawlers with no names and no ports of call that appear during distress situations. Ships that don't show up on radar, don't respond to hails, and vanish without a trace. Some captains claim they've seen them. Others say it's just maritime folklore, tall tales to scare new sailors. Petrov doesn't know what to believe, but he knows what Anne told him. And he knows that Derek Hollis is still out there, somewhere, on a boat that shouldn't exist. If you've ever encountered something at sea that defied explanation, or if you've heard stories from other mariners about ships that don't belong, I'd love to hear about it. And if this story left you unsettled, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we've got one final story coming, and it might be the most disturbing one yet. Story 6. The Deep Dive. Here's a fact about saturation diving that should terrify anyone who works underwater. When you dive deep enough, your body absorbs so much nitrogen and helium that you can't surface quickly without dying. Saturation divers live in pressurized chambers for weeks at a time, breathing gas mixtures that keep them alive at depths where normal humans couldn't survive. They're lowered to the ocean floor in diving bells. They work in near total darkness, and when their shift is over, they spend days decompressing before they can return to normal atmospheric pressure. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. Sometimes the danger doesn't come from equipment failure or the crushing pressure. Sometimes it comes from what's down there with you. This story comes from a decommissioned saturation diving report that was part of a legal settlement between an offshore contractor and the family of a deceased diver. The report was sealed, but a summary was leaked to a diving safety forum in 2018, and I was able to track down one of the divers who was part of the operation. His name is Marcus, and he agreed to talk to me on the condition that I didn't use his last name or the name of the company he worked for. He's been out of the diving industry for 5 years now, and he says he'll never go back. Here's what he told me. In 2013, Marcus was part of a saturation diving team working on an offshore oil platform in the North Sea. The job was routine: inspect and repair subsea pipelines at a depth of about 400 feet. The team consisted of 6 divers, split into 2 shifts, living in a pressurized habitat module on the platform. Marcus was paired with a diver named Colin, and their shift was scheduled for a 4-hour dive to inspect a section of pipeline that had been flagged for potential corrosion. They descended in the diving bell, a cramped metal sphere that was lowered on a cable from the platform above. The descent took about 20 minutes. Marcus and Colin sat in silence, breathing their mixed gas atmosphere, listening to the creak of the cable and the hum of the bell's life support systems. Outside the viewport, the ocean grew darker and darker until the only light came from the bell's external lamps. At 400 feet, the bell reached the seafloor and locked into position. Marcus and Colin exited through the bottom hatch, tethered to the bell by umbilicals that supplied their gas, heat, and communication lines. The seafloor was a barren expanse of silt and rock, lit only by their helmet lamps. Visibility was maybe 15 feet. The pipeline stretched out in front of them, a massive steel tube running along the ocean floor, disappearing into the murk. They began their inspection, moving along the pipeline, checking for cracks, rust, and damage. Everything seemed normal for the first hour. Then Marcus noticed something strange. There were marks on the pipeline, deep scratches running parallel along the surface, like something with claws had dragged itself across the metal. Marcus radioed the surface. "Hey, we've got some unusual scoring on the pipeline down here. Looks like impact damage, but the pattern's weird." The dive supervisor's voice crackled back. "Probably debris from a storm. Document it and keep moving." Marcus took photos and continued down the pipeline, but the scratches didn't stop. They got deeper, more deliberate, and they followed the pipeline for hundreds of feet. Then Colin found the first body. It wasn't human. It was a fish, but not like any fish Marcus had ever seen. It was about 3 feet long, pale and eyeless, with a jaw full of needle-like teeth. It was stuck to the pipeline, impaled on a piece of jagged metal. Colin examined it, then radioed up. "Looks like it got caught on the pipeline. Bag it and bring it up for analysis," the supervisor said. Colin pulled the fish free and stuffed it into a sample bag. But as he did, Marcus noticed something else. There were more of them. Scattered along the seafloor, half buried in the silt, were dozens of dead fish. All the same species, all pale and eyeless, and they were all facing the same direction, like they'd been fleeing from something. Marcus felt a knot of unease forming in his stomach. "Colin, you seeing this?" "Yeah," Colin replied. His voice was tight. "What the hell happened here?" They continued along the pipeline, and that's when they found the hole. It was about 50 feet ahead, a massive crater in the seafloor, maybe 20 feet across. The pipeline ran right up to the edge and then stopped, sheared off cleanly. The missing section had collapsed into the hole. Marcus radioed the surface. "We've got a major problem. The pipeline's been severed. Looks like the seafloor collapsed underneath it." The supervisor swore. "Can you see how deep the collapse goes?" Marcus edged closer to the hole, shining his light down. The crater was deep, far deeper than his light could reach. The walls were smooth, almost polished, like they'd been carved intentionally. And at the bottom, something was moving. Marcus froze. He aimed his light down, trying to get a better look. The movement stopped. "Colin, come take a look at this." Colin moved up beside him, and the two of them stared down into the hole. For a moment, there was nothing, just darkness. Then something looked back. It was an eye, massive, pale, unblinking. It filled the bottom of the crater, and it was staring directly at them. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, his umbilical tangling. "We need to go now." Colin didn't argue. The two of them turned and started back toward the diving bell, moving as fast as their bulky suits would allow. Behind them, the water shifted. Marcus glanced over his shoulder and saw it rising from the hole. It was enormous, a mass of pale, writhing flesh pulling itself up out of the crater. Tendrils extended from its body, each one as thick as a tree trunk, undulating in the current. "Move," Marcus shouted. They reached the bell and scrambled inside, slamming the hatch shut behind them. Marcus radioed the surface, his voice shaking. Get us up now." The winch engaged, and the bell started to rise. Marcus looked out the viewport and saw it below them, still coming. It was following the bell, its tendrils reaching up, grasping at the cable. One of the tendrils wrapped around the bell, and the entire structure lurched. The winch strained, the cable groaning under the weight. "Cut the pipeline," Marcus screamed into the radio. "Blow the anchors, do something." The dive supervisor was shouting orders, and seconds later, there was a muffled explosion below. The seafloor erupted in a cloud of silt and debris, and the tendril released its grip on the bell. The bell shot upward, pulled by the winch, and within minutes, they were back on the surface. Marcus and Colin were pulled out of the bell and into the decompression chamber. They didn't speak. They just sat there staring at each other, trying to process what they'd seen. The company sent another dive team down a week later to assess the damage. They found the crater, but it was empty. The pipeline section was gone, and there was no sign of the creature. The incident was classified as a seismic collapse, and the company quietly relocated the pipeline. Marcus and Colin were paid a settlement and made to sign NDAs. Marcus left the industry shortly after. He told me he still has nightmares about that eye, the way it looked at him, like it was studying him. "I don't know what it was," Marcus said, "but I know it was old. Older than the oil, older than the rock. I think we woke it up. The North Sea is full of drilling sites, pipelines, and subsea infrastructure. Thousands of divers work those depths every year. Sometimes they see things they're not supposed to talk about. If you've worked in saturation diving or deep water operations and encountered something that still haunts you, I'd love to hear your story. And if these 6 stories have left you looking at the ocean a little differently, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are always more stories out there waiting to be told. Thanks for listening, and remember, the ocean is deeper than you think, and it's been down there a lot longer than we have. That's it for today's series on deep sea and offshore horror stories. 6 accounts from the people who work in some of the most isolated, dangerous environments on the planet. Whether you believe these stories are true, exaggerated, or something in between, one thing is certain: the ocean keeps its secrets well. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life horror, unexplained phenomena, and stories from the edge of human experience. And if you have a story of your own, whether it's from offshore work, maritime shipping, or anywhere else where the world gets a little too quiet and a little too strange, feel free to share it in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.